Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week, the state of Minnesota finally opens their first adult use dispensaries, and President Trump's drug czar admits that cannabis reform is a bipartisan issue and that rescheduling is still being considered. And Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer threatens to double cannabis taxes on the industry in her state, which could threaten its existence. Amy Carter has that story. Guess who is criticizing Texas Governor Greg Abbott's executive order on THC hemp regulations? Yep, it's that Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, as the power struggle heats up in the Lone Star State. And this is the weekend of the annual Freedom Rally in Massachusetts, where the legalization of cannabis is now celebrated.
Chris Verone here, 36th Annual Boston Freedom Rally. Big deal here. Mount Michael Malta in the background over there, main stage back there, tens of thousands of people, Parkman bandstand right there.
Across the pond, Snoop Dogg's venture capital fund invests heavily in the British cannabis market as Snoop continues to carve out his place as the #1 cannabis influencer in this country. All that and international reports on Cannabis Coast to Coast News next.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Karen Black, filling in for Elena Pinto, who is off this week, but is expected back next week. Our first story this week is an update on cannabis reform at the federal level. It's been over a month since President Donald Trump mentioned at a news conference that rescheduling, or as he stated, reclassification, is something he wants to take care of over the next few weeks. In the meantime, the president's nominee for the next drug czar, Sara Carter Bailey, testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee this past week and shared that rescheduling is a bipartisan issue and talks are continuing behind closed doors. Nothing ever moves fast in Washington, D.C., and Andrew Behringer has more from our nation's capital.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. President Donald Trump's nominee for White House drug czars, Sara Carter, has highlighted that cannabis is a bipartisan issue, but emphasized that the administration is still considering all options on how to approach cannabis scheduling. During her recent confirmation hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee, Carter discussed the potential to move cannabis from a Schedule I to a Schedule III of the Controlled Substances Act. She stated that all options remain on the table, while also recognizing widespread bipartisan support for cannabis reform, especially around medical cannabis benefits. Now, Senator Cory Booker, a strong advocate, pressed Carter on advice she would give to the president regarding the rescheduling process. Booker praised the medical benefits of cannabis, particularly for treating PTSD, and called for more scientific research. Carter responded that she supports a bipartisan approach and pledged to follow federal law and emphasize her focus on research and data. She mentioned her meetings with the VA secretary and her belief in studying cannabis impacts thoroughly. While Carter says she has no problem with monitored legalization, she also detailed the current legal restrictions that prevent the drug czar from endorsing legalization efforts. A Democratic bill is still currently going through Congress to remove restrictions around cannabis. Carter will continue the trend of recent officials supporting medical cannabis, but the debate over rescheduling and broader legalization remains ongoing. Now, that's the Washington, D.C. report. I'm Andrew Behringer, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One of the stories that seems to be going on forever is the battle over hemp regulations in the state of Texas. There are two different political leaders on the debate. One is their Governor Greg Abbott, and the other is his Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who also controls the Republican-led Senate in that state. Governor Abbott wanted specific regulations, and Patrick wanted an outright ban on all THC-infused products derived from hemp. That is now a $6 billion industry in Texas with over 50,000 citizens employed. So Governor Abbott called two special sessions of his legislature over the summer to come up with a regulatory plan. Those two sessions did not solve anything, so Abbott used his executive order powers to enact regulations for the industry that at least keeps the industry alive. Kerry Hinkle has more in his hemp report this week.
This is Kerry Hinkle with Bi-UCD Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I am back again with another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, the second week of September, we see a final resolution in the long saga that has been the Texas legislature. As you may remember, in the last few months, both during regular session and the subsequent two special sessions, the legislature, the governor, and in particular the lieutenant governor have been unable to find a compromise on all things hemp regulation. That is why this week, Governor Abbott issued an executive order that requires the Department of State Health Services, DSHS, to work with TABC, the Alcoholic Beverage Commission, to implement some much needed regulation on the industry. This includes 21 and up by only selling these products to adults, truth in labeling, and elimination of lookalike products, and also a study to subsequently be had at A&M to look at how to implement larger regulations during the next session, and industry feedback will be welcomed alongside law enforcement and others in this commission at A&M. So the governor is taking short-term action on some products as well as establishing a commission to look at how to properly regulate these for the long term during the next session. Now, the part that's most interesting in the hemp industry right now is a new requirement for total THC testing standards. We've seen other states like Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Kentucky implement total THC testing standards with an effort and a direct attack on hemp flower. So while we still wait for DSHS and TABC to implement rulemaking and take industry feedback and understand exactly what the governor can and can't do with his executive order, by issuing a total THC testing standard, many in the industry view this as a direct attack on hemp flower availability. So we will see how that category is specifically handled here soon, but the larger industry of beverage, edibles, topicals, tinctures, etc. is now safe thanks in part to Governor Abbott and his executive order. This is a clear attempt to implement regulation rather than prohibition of a large $6 to $7 billion industry that many adults in Texas currently enjoy. So thank you for all that have been following along in the last few months of this long saga. We are thankful here at bi-UCD Hemp for Governor Abbott and his action with the executive order. But for, again, I am Kerry Hinkle with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Next week, I will be back with another state and hopefully nothing Texas related for some time.
One disturbing trend in state politics that continues in the U.S. is now moving into Michigan. That trend is an increase in taxes on cannabis when any state needs to make up for a budget shortfall. Michigan has grown into one of the most successful cannabis states, but now the governor there wants a hefty tax increase. In our Michigan report this week, Amy Carter has some background on this tactic and how the industry is responding. The Michigan Report is now sponsored by Wally's Wonder World of Customized Humidors.
This is mold on wheat. This is mold on weed. And this is what this Wonderworld plant is supposed to look like. Do you want to make sure this never happens to your precious flower? Check out the handmade humidors by Fenton, Michigan craftsman Gregory Johnson. Each humidor can hold 1 ounce of your stash, and it comes with a Boveda humidity pack. You care about your flower, so protect it inside a humidor made with American-grown maple, cherry, or sapele wood. Check out their website at wallyswonderworld.com. There you'll find the famous award-winning Hakuna Matata No Worries Humidor. You'll also find a variety of humidors with different designs. They even customize accessories like doobie tubes, grinders, and even a classic roach clip from the 70s. Treat your stash with class with a custom-made, handmade humidor from wallyswonderworld.com, and never worry about moldy weed again.
I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Boy, do we have a lot going on. Time to light it up. The Michigan Cannabis Regulatory Agency is playing catch-up, but they're finally trying to tackle the black market and unregulated hemp products. The CRA's director, Brian Hanna, has seen some legal products that are way too potent, and he's not having it. Their game plan, they want to create a new $2.8 million lab to get their testing dialed in, and also trying to clean up the licensing process. Basically, the CRA is trying to get a handle on the industry again and keep the market safe. A 19-year-old from Clarkson is in big trouble after allegedly selling cannabis and vapes to a 12-year-old outside of a school. Police say they found a huge stash of cash, weed, and vapes in his grandparents' basement. He's now facing felony charges, and a judge will decide his fate soon. Michigan's cannabis market is swimming in supply. Monthly sales hit a record of $283 million in August, but prices are at an all-time low. There's way too much product. For every pound sold, 2 more are produced. It's a buyer's market, but a tricky one for businesses. 4 cannabis companies in Oakland County got busted for breaking the rules. Moses Roses got a slap on the wrist for a paperwork mix-up. Aries Analytic and Steadfast failed their lab test, and Society C got caught with a messy waste system and some gear that they did not register. Talk about a sketchy delivery. Battle Creek Dispensary is in hot water after regulators say they sold pounds of cannabis to an out-of-state buyer. The case broke open when cops found a huge stash, 7 pounds of flour and 16 ounces of concentrate in a car near Warren Dunes. Video footage allegedly shows a customer leaving the Fire Creek dispensary with a duffel bag full of 200 packages of product. Michigan's Best Buds got their awards. The 4th annual Olympics competition, aka the Grammys of Michigan weed, just crowned High Tech, Archive, and Growing Pains as the top winners. The sold-out event lets everyday weed lovers judge hundreds of strains before a big party in Pontiac where champions are announced. And I cannot stress enough, please call your lawmakers this week or join us for Advocacy Day in Lansing on Wednesday, September 24th. Democrats in the state Senate are reportedly backing Governor Whitmer's plan to almost double the tax on cannabis. They want a new 32% wholesale excise tax to raise nearly $500 million for road repairs. But the industry is worried it will crush businesses and make a legal product way too expensive for consumers. That's it for this week. Again, please reach out to your lawmaker or scan this code easily and send an email. I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Michigan Report is sponsored by Wally'sWonderworld.com.
Federal and state cannabis laws, rules, and regulations relating to all cannabis products continue to confuse citizens and lawmakers in this country. The state of Texas is a prime example of this, where they have an over-regulated and barely surviving medical program and a thriving hemp-derived THC products industry. Some states have flat out banned all hemp-derived THC products, and now you can add Maryland to that list. A court decision this week in the Old Line state defined the difference between Delta 8 and Delta 9 products for sale in that legal adult use market. Keep in mind, the federal government defined legal hemp with the passing of the 2018 Farm Bill, and that launched 2 different billion-dollar industries, one that is unregulated and the other that's overregulated. Christopher Bright has more in our Maryland report this week.
I'm Christopher Bright from The Enlightened Voice. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'll be bringing you the latest cannabis headlines from Maryland. A Maryland affiliate court has ruled that Delta 8 and Delta 10 THC products are illegal and have always been illegal in the state, despite lax enforcement. The decision reported by the Baltimore Sun clarifies that these hemp-derived cannabinoids, often synthesized from industrial hemp, don't fall under Maryland's legal adult use cannabis program, which allows Delta 9 THC from cannabis. The court rejected a lawsuit from Maryland's Hemp Coalition, which argued that the state regulations created an unfair monopoly punishing unlicensed hemp businesses. Judge Dan Friedman stated that the Cannabis Reform Act protects public interest and that hemp-derived intoxicants aren't covered by federal hemp laws. Meanwhile, Maryland's legal cannabis industry generated $18.4 million in tax revenue from April to June 2025. And now we have our content creator of the week. I would like to shine a spotlight on Nicole Butler, aka Canna Cape Cod DC on IG. Her Instagram showcases a vibrant Black woman-owned 420-friendly resort on the East Coast. It highlights all-inclusive stays with infused meals, edibles, a flower bar, an open bar, and a 24-hour snack bar. Make sure to follow her on IG at Canna Cape Cod DC. That's all for this week's Maryland Cannabis Report. I'm Christopher Bright from The Enlightened Voice reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In Virginia this week, the Patients Out of Time Advocacy Group held their annual convention. This is one group in the States that has always recognized the medicinal benefits of the cannabis sativa plant. Joe Parsons was there, and here's his report for this week.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection, by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Today, I'm proud to be in Charlottesville at the Patients at a Time 16th Annual National Clinical Conference on Cannabis Therapeutics. It's been an absolutely awesome day. Today was the final day of the show. I was able to catch up with a bunch of the people that were involved, including, of course, none other than Mary Lynn Mathis.
This is for you guys, because if we don't give it to you, the government's going to take it. If that makes sense. So we might as well give it to the people who've been fighting the hardest to get the cannabis plant as a medicine. We believe this is the right path because we play within the guidelines of the FDA, of NIH, of the international trees. And as if we're trusted with a little bit of this, maybe I'm very optimistic they'll trust us with some of the other compounds as well, to where we can start building a plant-based medicine system for the United States, for the people, and get them off of this synthetic compounds.
One increment, we have Bridget Caldwell goes, some of our area directors, Patients at a Time, and she's coming today talking about prison cannabis and traditional medicine. We also need to see what is our focus and alterate so that we can have illicit impact, and that we're not leaving any patient behind. If our patients are already using cannabis, isn't it our responsibility to guide them, not leave them to the street?
All right, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB in Charlottesville. And reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
One of the most recognized advocates and outspoken leaders in the cannabis reform effort in this country is Wanda James in Colorado. Now, she's announced that she is making a run for one of the congressional seats in the Centennial State. Here's Jenny Germano with more from Colorado.
I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting. This is the Colorado Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A major Democratic primary is shaping up in Colorado as business leader and cannabis pioneer. Ms. Wanda James has officially announced her bid to unseat Representative Diana DeGette. Ms. DeGette has represented Denver's 1st Congressional District since 1997. Ms. James is a first-generation University of Colorado graduate, Navy veteran, and entrepreneur, and has built her profile over years in both business and in politics. She and her husband founded Simply Pure, widely recognized as the first Black-owned licensed cannabis dispensary in the United States. Her campaign announcement came on September 17th, 2025, when she launched her 2026 primary challenge to Ms. DeGette, saying the Democratic brand in her district needs renewal. She argues that longtime incumbents are no longer reflecting the evolving demographics, needs, and expectations of Denver voters. Ms. James tells voters her priorities will include expanding affordable health care, supporting small businesses, and tackling rising costs of living and improving quality education. Ms. James has political experience behind her. She helped Governor Jared Polis with his first congressional campaign, served on the task force for Colorado's legalization of adult use cannabis for Amendment 64, and has been active in fundraising and democratic politics at state and national levels. Her supporters say she brings both lived experience and real organizational strength. Stay tuned for future updates leading up to the 2026 primary in Denver, Colorado. I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That will do it for the A block or first section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. And we still have our international segment for you. Plus, the Massachusetts Freedom Rally took place this weekend in Boston. Curtis Emery will have our Bay State report coming up as Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
Your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner. $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471C reviews this month. Link in the description.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.